Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Martin Mendelson. I want to welcome you to the webinar this evening as people kind of rifle in, flow in from various time zones, whether it's the afternoon or the evening. We're going to give this a couple moments to allow people to get settled and settle back and settle in with whatever beverage of your choice you may have this evening. Super excited to be moderating this panel this evening. And so as people come in, I just want to remind everybody that we will be taking Q&A from everyone. And so we would encourage you to go to your Zoom controller. There's a cute little Q&A button there with a question mark that you can click and then add your questions as we go along. And I will be moderating those questions and offering them up to the panelists toward the end of our hour together. Speaking of the hour, you will be receiving an hour worth of CE credit, and you will be sent that CE credit within 10 business days. And if you're concerned about, oh, I missed this or I missed that, guess what? We're also going to send you a recording for all of those registered. So if you have a friend that said, oh, shoot, I missed it, they're going to get a recording just like you. So before we kind of begin and before we do introductions, I know Eric has some poll questions for those of you that are here. And as you start to look at those poll questions, there's a reason why we're asking these. You know what it is? We have a lot of experience here. I was doing some math and I believe we have over 100 years of experience in dentistry here this evening. And so the answers to these questions will help us cater to the experience that you're going to have this evening, the answer to the questions themselves, based on who has actually joined us this evening. So we'd like to give you a couple moments to fill out the introductory poll. We'll also have a poll at the end of the evening. And if you did just join us, we will be accepting Q&A throughout the evening, throughout the hour today. My name is Dr. Martin Mendelson. I will be moderating the esteemed panel this evening. We'll be sending you your CE credits within about 10 business days, and everyone who is registered will receive a recording of tonight's, I'm going to say, festivities. So how do we sound? So let's go into some introduction, shall we, as people complete the polls. I'd like to kind of introduce our panel and then kind of explain kind of the purpose and the process of the hour. So first of all, alphabetical by first name, we have Alan Twigg, who is the president of Ben Erickson and Associates. And Ben Erickson makes HR approachable and straightforward. With 18 plus years on the people side of business, he's your go-to guide for navigating HR, and I can certainly speak to my clients that have utilized their services. And Alan helps leaders turn ever-changing HR landscapes into an actual competitive advantage because your people are your practice's greatest asset. Next, we have Mr. David Harris, who is the CEO of ProsperDent, the world's largest dental exclusive forensic accounting company. David's previous experience as a thief gives him an unrivaled expertise in helping clients with embezzlement issues, and he is a forensic CPA and private investigator. And last but not least, we have Eric Pook, like book. Thank you, Eric, for that clarification. He is the president of Cirrus Consulting Group, Dental Office Lease Negotiations, which is the preeminent tenant advisory and office lease negotiation firm for dentists. Cirrus has helped over 13,000 doctors over the last 30 years, recognized as a foremost authority on dental office leases. Eric is a certified instructor of continuing education courses accredited by the AGD and serves on the faculty of the Schulich School of Business. Cirrus has saved dentists over, you ready for this, 400 million by advising them on how to successfully leverage the dental office lease agreement to help reduce risk and maximize practice value. Last but not least, who am I? Well, as I said, my name is Dr. Martin Mendelson. I'm the founder of Metamorphosis Coaching and a former member of the resident faculty of Spear Education. And my goal in my little enterprise is to help dental professionals get out of their own way through the science of mindset, communication, and productivity, whether that's on a stage, one-on-one, or with your teams. And I'm excited to report that my first book, One Move Makes All the Difference, will be published this December by Morgan James out of New York City. So, as everybody has kind of finished the polls, really the purpose of this hour is to really address the significant shifts and changes and challenges, frankly, in the dental professions. And there's both risks and solutions to any of these challenges. And so we're here to chat with the industry experts so that practitioners can discover solutions to achieve better outcomes and reduce stress. Process is that I'm going to be asking questions of the panelists to understand actually, excuse me, we already asked you some questions to understand better who you are. And we're going to do the introduction as we just did. And then we will start the panel discussion. After the panel discussion, toward the top of the hour, we'll open it for two questions from the audience. And lastly, you'll have the opportunity to opt in to be contacted by any of the panelists or me as the moderator. And so our result or our hope is that you gain actionable insights and expand your knowledge in a diverse variety of practice areas. So that's who we are, why we're here, and what we hope to accomplish this evening. So, gentlemen.
And a quick update. Thank you so much, Martin. A
Yes.
quick update. So 62%, we've got three quarters have already filled out the poll. 62% are dental practice owners, 4% associate dentists, 19% office manager administration, 15% other, and then the biggest, I'd say, group are mid-career staying put. 12% think of transitioning in the next 5 years, 12% thinking about opening or relocating first or second clinic. And almost across the board, everyone's in for reducing risk, preventing financial fraud and theft, HR compliance, reducing overhead across the board. And then we'll go through some of the handbook pieces. 54%, Alan, have done it within the first year, which is great. 1 to 2 years, 19%, 15% at 2 to 5 years, 12% 5+. And David, your numbers line up again and again and again. Knowing someone or has been a victim of embezzlement, 71% have said yes, right? Like clockwork each and every time.
That's amazing. So thank you everybody for filling out those poll questions. I'm sure you can now see, now that we've all heard the data, why we asked you for that, so that we can tailor this experience for you all to give you the greatest value for your very precious time this evening. So let's kind of kick things off with a big picture. So what do each of you see as some of the top hidden challenges or blind spots that dentists face today, or dental practices, we should say, especially when it comes to practice operations and risk management? So whoever would like to start, go for it.
I'll kick it off, sure. So for me, I would say my answer is not going to sound all that amazing when I say it, and that's culture. And culture doesn't seem like a blind spot, but here's why I would say it is. It's because many offices right now, of course, are struggling with recruiting and hiring and finding people. Culture helps with that. Many offices are struggling with turnover and losing people. Culture helps with that as well. Every practice I've ever met has big goals. They want to go fee for service. They want to do multiple locations. They want to invest in new technology. And it requires a really solid, awesome team to get all that stuff. It's also about risk management, because if you have a lot of turnover, if you're having a lot of changes, that will increase your HR risks. And culture is really the lifeblood that kind of flows through all of that stuff. And it also leads to a bigger bottom line ultimately for the practice. So I just think that is a blind spot, is kind of this idea of how important culture is in all these areas that we think about in our practices. And I mean, I could get into definitions of culture and all that, but ultimately it's just about relating your culture to all these things that you really want to achieve and these big challenges that you're facing.
I was, I love that answer, Alan. I was going to ask you, well, how do you define culture? But I want to ask you something different, which is this: who's responsible for culture, in your opinion?
Well, okay, I'll share. There are a lot of definitions of culture. I think everyone is responsible, but obviously the leader sets the tone more than anyone.
Yeah.
And the leader is ultimately responsible for the culture. But one of my favorite definitions of culture is that it is basically like, think of it like a Google 5-star rating for every interaction that everybody has throughout every day in the practice. So the doctor with the team, the manager with the team with each other, the team with new hires, all of those interactions, if you rated every single interaction on a 5-star rating, average that over time, that's essentially a way of looking at your culture. And I love that definition because number one, it means that it's an average. You don't necessarily have to have it be the world's greatest Disneyland experience every single day because it is an average. We all have off days and all that.
Yeah.
The other thing I like about it is it reminds us that culture is an ongoing thing. It's not just we take the trip take the team to Vegas and then we're done and our culture is good, or we put a sign up on the wall and now our culture is done forever. It's a constant thing all day, every day.
I love that. Absolutely. David, what are your thoughts on top hidden challenges or blind spots?
Well, culture is a great one, and I want to give a shout out to the person who, in my organization, I think of as, among other things, the chief culture officer, and her name's Kathy Kirkby. She's actually in attendance tonight, so I wanted to give a shout out to her because she's done so much to make our culture where we want it to be. I'm going to go to something a little more mechanical and a little less ephemeral than Alan's choice. And I'm going to say that one of the problems that faces dentistry today is that insurance is like this opiate that a lot of practices have become addicted to. Mm. And a lot of practices right now are caught between increasing costs for everything from staff to gloves to whatever. And at the same time, insurance reimbursement just isn't keeping pace. And I'll add one more thing, which is I think the insurance companies have figured out that for every 100 insurance claims that they reject, that a certain number never get resubmitted. So I think they're putting pressure on their staff, and in some cases they're using AI, and rejection rates of claims seem to be going up. And those two things, which again are a little more mechanical, in my mind, are putting a lot of practices in a bind. And the number of doctors I talk to these days who are only surviving because they're running a volume-oriented business is growing.
Yeah. You made me think the rejected claim is like the gift card of dentistry, where if you've ever looked at the percentage of gift card redemption, it's rather scary, folks. So it's kind of like that's what made me think of it. And the truth of the matter is, if things are getting quite volatile for you financially in your practice, there are ways out, but the only ways out are through data-driven analytics and really understanding where you are today and how you can move forward. I actually wrote a case study article in Dental Economics in April about Dr. Donald Anderson from Fresno, California, who ended up having culture problems and insurance challenges and got out from under all of them. But the real thing that kept him sane was actually his mindset and his thought about dentistry, his practice, and where he wanted his life to go. So, Eric, sir, what say you about blind spots and those things?
I mean, I was just looking at what we were touching on the other day was a recent ADA stat that showed a survey that came through that said, looking ahead the next 6 months, what are the top 3 biggest challenges facing your dental clinic? Ironically, Dallin's point, 63.2% were workplace issues, hiring, recruiting, training, recruiting staff. To David's point, 49.2% were insurance reimbursement, delayed, denied payment, etc. And then number 3, I'd be remiss to not include this, is to increasing overhead expenses. Supplies, equipment, and office rent represented the third. So that, I've got the privilege of speaking to dozens of doctors each and every month, and a number of are joining here this evening. And it's, the feedback is, look, I'm working as hard or harder, and at the end of the day, I'm taking home the same, if not less. Why? And then it becomes an element of time and focus. Well, great. Boy, my dealer rep just came in the other day and I said, boy, am I going to try to squeeze on supplies and equipment because I know there's some margin there and I can fight on it. Which ironically, roughly about 5.2% is per every dollar that's brought in is going towards gloves, cups, right, etc. Ironically, rent and tenancy expense represents 8.32% on average across the country. Meaning, yet at the same time, the doctor typically, on average, uh, doesn't follow the best practices or ends up paying exorbitant amount of increases in rent. So the trends we're seeing today are not a lot of difference from our past 31 years in business. The best time for a dentist to start renegotiating their office lease is 2 years prior to the lease expiry. The average dentist starts the renewal process typically 2 months prior to the lease expiry, after the landlord failed to remind them, why would they, that they have to give notice 6 or 12 months prior to the lease expiry. The remaining two options become null and void. And a recent study out of one of the prominent universities came out recently that showed that the larger landlords are increasing rent by over 44% more than the mom and pop landlords. So, from a challenge point of view, is just we're so busy being busy. It is so much more difficult to open a clinic today than it was 5 years prior, than it was 5 years prior, than it was 5 years prior to that. The demands on the dentist is so much more. And still to this day, a lot of the education institutions are not spending the time teaching on the business side of dentistry. So rising overhead for sure is one of the top ones, consistent challenges we're seeing, and it's only getting worse.
Okay. So, really great insights. And again, goes to the devil's in the details, right? It's all in the numbers. What we think might be happening may not be happening. So we really need to dive in and really understand the landscape that's in front of us. And so each one of you in large or part mentioned staffing challenges. And so let's dive a little deeper there, because staffing does continue to be one of the toughest challenges in dentistry. And so let's talk more in detail about what do you think are some of the realistic strategies that practices can use to find, hire, and retain some of those individuals, especially in today's competitive market. So this time, David, let's start with you this time.
Absolutely. I think that something that dentists can do is to be proactive about their HR needs.
Mm-hmm.
Every dentist, Martin, understands the concept of a short notice list for patients.
Yep.
But they typically don't apply the same concept to staffing. In other words, the hiring process, or the attraction process that precedes the hiring process, really starts when some staff member gives you their notice. And of course, in dentistry, the notice that somebody gives you is always ridiculously short. So somebody says to you on Tuesday that Thursday is their last day.
Yeah.
And then you're starting cold and trying to hire. And a couple of things happen there. One is that that kind of precludes any kind of meaningful pre-employment screening before somebody's hired. So you end up making hiring mistakes. You end up hiring people who have embezzled in 3 other practices before, and you just didn't have time to check it out. And there are a lot more problems with rapid hiring than that. What I say to dentists is, that turnover is going to be a fact of life. And let's acknowledge that. And what that means is that as a dentist, as a business owner, you need to become a collector of people. And you run into people who all the time who might be a fit in your practice, and you need to recognize that and maybe even tell them that, so that when you actually have a need, instead of starting cold, you have 3 people who you've already talked to and said, I think you'd be a fit in my office, that you can reach out to.
No, that's a great answer.
So
Yeah,
to me, proactivity is where it starts.
got it. What, Alan, what are your thoughts? And by the way, we did have a question come in that's very relevant to this. What's the average percent of overhead for payroll in practices today?
Yeah, and that one, people always ask me that question, and I wish I could give like a really concrete answer, or a real thing that says, oh, you're a GP, it should be exactly this percent. It just varies massively. It varies based on how many days of hygiene you're doing, how much specialty work you're doing, if any. It's a really wide range. So I hesitate to even give a number on that. If we had an ADCPA or something on the panel, they could probably give us some numbers on that. David may have some opinions, but I just think, with staffing and recruiting in particular, the thing that I would strongly recommend folks do is go to a third space meaning not your home, not your office, sit down with a cup of coffee and write out what we call your UEP, or your unique employment proposition. Why should a really great, high quality, great attitude, wealth of experience employee choose your practice versus the practice down the street? I'm sure you can already articulate why a patient should choose your practice, but think about it from the employee perspective. And it's not just about your wages and your benefits. Dan Clark says, if they come for money, they'll leave for money. And I think it's very important to think about the employee experience. What does it feel like to work in your practice? And it doesn't have to be a big complicated thing, but just write down what that's like. Maybe at your office, it's really casual and fun and a great atmosphere. Maybe it's real professional. There's no right or wrong answer with it, but you want to be able to articulate that in your job postings, because you can't rely on waiting for someone to come in for an interview and then you tell them how awesome and amazing the practice is. You've got to do that in your job postings. And I totally agree with what David said about this idea of almost like always recruiting. And if you're out there and you're meeting people in the community and all of that, you can be on the hunt for those little qualities that you want, kind of those things classically that you can't teach. You want to be on the hunt for those things, and yeah, finding those people, and then having some kind of the reason for the UEP is being armed with something that you can quickly deliver to them that says, hey, you could probably work anywhere. And especially someone that's got really good dental experience and a great attitude, they could literally work anywhere they wanted and get a job anywhere tomorrow. So why should they choose your practice, and what is it about your office that is unique?
I love that. And, for those of you who know me, I'm a really big networker because relationships are everything. And I think it was either Steve Anderson or Walter Haley, the late great Walter Haley, had said, soar with eagles, don't flock with turkeys. And so if you're constantly looking and you're finding these amazing people, guess who they hang out with? Other amazing people. So I love that concept. So Eric, what are your thoughts on this?
I'll give a glass half full, extra perspective here. And if 63% per the study show that staffing is the biggest issue, you're not alone, doctors. If you asked each of the four of us, what are some of the biggest challenges? Maybe not David, because he's got a chief cultural officer type thing, but what is some of the biggest challenges is people and staff. Line up every entrepreneur, go to an entrepreneurial part as the business owner myself, chatting with other business owners. It's people, right? Why aren't they committed as I am? Why aren't they thinking the same way I am? Why, right? And so yet, in other businesses, at McDonald's or otherwise, in dentistry, the same survey showed roughly 3% said competition and DSOs were the concern. How amazing is it that staff, on the positive side of things, right? Staff is the biggest issue, which is the same for everybody. But on the bright side, there are so many less concerns, such as competition, that at least on the business side, there is, knowing that staffing is such a big concern, how do we do things differently, right? How do we look at our practice uniquely as we walk in, as we sit down, as the facilities we have, what are important? I'd be remiss to not link it to the physical space, but it's a great perspective where many doctors, especially in the major urban areas, are starting to see things like a demolition clause, relocation clause, etc. And they realize, hey, I'm not going to sell my clinic in the same space as I am here. So at some point between now and then, I am going to need to do some sort of a relocation. So then thinking about, what are the tiny little things that do upset the staff? Oh, the break room, right, is right next to the bathroom, or, all these tiny little design things that if you were to eventually look to a new location or simply renew or maybe even expand into the adjacent suite, what are some strategic ways you can make some renovations in the space to really just make that average day to day? My God, look how much of their lives are spent, your lives especially, in that practice. What are some little things that might not be the biggest cost, but could get some really marginal increase of their utility and their day to day enjoyment?
Absolutely. And there were some comments in the Q&A that I think I'll come back to toward the end of the hour, some challenges and some frustrations around escalating prices and unemployment benefits and so forth. I'll come back to that a little bit later. But um, if we look at kind of the staffing and the HR landscape, and that seems to keep evolving constantly and changing every other day. Um, what do y'all think are some of the critical compliance changes or legal updates that dentists really need to be focusing on right now, from your perspectives? So, Eric, I keep making you go last. Do you want to go first?
Sure, happy to. It's interesting. I mean, we've been supporting clients across North America, and hot off the press, there is some changes based on some articles that have come out from the Competition Bureau that are now starting to focus on the exclusivity provision within leases, i.e., I'm a general dentist, I'm coming in, I want to be exclusively the only general dentist into my strip mall. There is now, and I won't get into all the legalities in the act and these sorts of things, but it is now becoming more and more challenging, or less and less landlords are wanting to offer that sort of exclusivity. Now, there's lots of components based on investment and other pieces, but yes, it's an ever dynamically changing field. The reality is that the lease also now, having done a lot of recent courses such as this with some of the practice brokers across the US and Canada, there's a ton of agreement now that one of the top issues preventing a dental clinic from selling is that silly, frustrating office lease agreement that might have been signed in 1986 and then renewed and assigned and renewed and assigned. In short, it's the banks that are driving this. The banks are driving that million, $2 million loan to the buyer. And, from your practice, Martin, from otherwise, it's changed so much where now the banks typically will not issue a long-term loan to your buyer if there's insufficient term on the lease. Many banks have basically come back to say, look, I will give you, Mr. Buyer, a 12-year amortization schedule to pay back the $2 million loan, but I will only take it as far as the end of the lease because that's the only guaranteed amount of term that your buyer would have. And so much so that some practice brokers recently have actually assessed a cost, a reduction of value, if there's a demolition, relocation, or lack of term in the lease to factor in that risk to the buyer, i.e., I sell to, right, Dr. Mendelson. Dr. Mendelson buys my clinic, takes over, and suddenly then 3 years later, he's forced to relocate across the street and build out at $350 per square foot. So we recently looked at $1 million producing clinic, $300,000 worth of EBITDA, was listed at 1.9 million, but they reduced it by 525,000 because of, right, to that regulation compliance component, because of that one little clause that did not give enough predictability and continuity of revenue to the buyer.
That's an expensive clause, $500,000. That's wild. That's wild. Alan, what are you thinking? I know you're chomping at the bit for this one.
Yeah, compliance in the HR space. Whew, boy. So let's just look at the last 10 years, okay? So and I'll pick three different types of HR laws. So one is paid family leave. So this is when it's a state-run program, people have certain, leave requirements and it's paid for through the state program. In the last 10 years, there have been 11 states that have passed those types of laws. So 10 years ago, didn't exist. Now we have 11. Let's take sick leave, mandatory sick leave. We have had 14 states and a whole bunch of cities and counties that have passed those in the last 10 years. So that's quite a bit. Pregnancy disability accommodation. This is one where think about how often pregnancy happens in the dental field. This is one where basically the practice is legally required to make a good faith effort at accommodations when there is an employee who is medically disabled due to pregnancy. 26 states have passed those in the last 10 years. That's half the country. And so Now, I know this is a little bit preaching to the choir. I know every practice knows about OSHA and HIPAA and record keeping and all of those types of things, but HR compliance is one of those things that is just so universally not known as readily as OSHA, HIPAA, and record keeping and so on. It's also accelerating. So here's a little bit more data. So in the 5 years from the beginning of 2015 to the end of 2019, we sent out 87 policy changes. So that was new laws that had never existed before, or it was major changes to existing laws. So 87 over 5 years. From 2020 through the end of 2024, it was 259. So again, this is not just a nice linear, slow increase in rules. This is a sharp increase. And this is why it's so important to have an employee handbook that is current and up to date and in compliance. And it's also why it's so important to have a policy manual or an employee handbook in the first place. I'm really happy to hear that a number of the folks on this webinar already have a manual and that it's been updated. But this whole area of HR compliance is just one of those areas that is so incredibly difficult to do yourself. It is possible to sit down with the text of the bill when there's a new state or federal law and read all the text, and then write your own policy or try to use ChatGPT or something. But it is really difficult to make sure that it's done properly and it's done accurately. And it's incredibly time consuming. And it's also something that most office managers don't want to do, don't have proper training to do. And it's just one of these classic things of time versus money and what's the best use of somebody's time.
You just took the words out of my mouth. I mean, all you have to do is sit down, regardless of your role in the practice, figure out what your time is worth per hour, even at a guesstimation of how long this would take just to even update every year. Even if you have one, you're going to very quickly figure out that this is not worth your time. And ignorance is no excuse for the law. And if you miss a new bill, which I, would be very easy to do, then you're up a creek without a paddle, so to speak. So, David, what are your thoughts on this area?
It has very little to do with what I do every day, but one thing I've been watching with interest is states starting to increasingly regulate insurance. And of course, one that we hear about sometimes is the MLR, the medical loss ratio, that's now been implemented in states like Massachusetts, where insurance companies are required, dental insurance companies are required to pay out a certain percentage of what they take in. Up to now, dental insurance has really been the Wild West. And it's good to see some states taking interest in that. There's one other thing I'm seeing that I really like. And several states have now regulated so that when you ask an insurance company for a predetermination, they're now obligated to pay it. Because a lot of people don't realize this, but in most states, you can send in a pre-D and get back a response from the insurance company. And then when you file the actual claim, they kind of change their mind. And of course, as a dentist, you're relying on that predetermination to tell you what's covered. I mean, that's kind of why you did it in the first place. So there are normally some carve outs. I mean, if somebody leaves their job and loses their dental insurance in between the predetermination and the treatment, there's normally a carve out for that. So the insurance companies aren't obligated there. But in general, with states that have passed these rules, once they give you a predetermination, it's binding on them, which to me is just such common sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's turn to your area of expertise, David, shall we? So for those of you who may not be aware, dentistry is one of the most embezzled professions out there. And so what are some practical steps? And I know you can talk on this for hours. I've seen you do so, and it's a fascinating tale that you share about yourself and a lot of the clients that you've worked with over the years. But what practical steps can busy practice owners take to safeguard themselves without becoming overwhelmed? What are your thoughts?
I'm going to give you three, and I'll start by saying that 70% of dentists will be embezzled at some point in their careers. So this is not a problem that afflicts 5% or 15% of dentistry. This is a mainstream issue. Three things that people can do, Martin. The first is hire carefully.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that in general, and I'll probably get a vigorous nod from Alan on this, in general, dentists do a terrible job of pre-employment screening. one statistic that everybody in the audience, thank you, Alan, that everybody in the audience needs to hear is that 70 million Americans, which equates to about 1 in 4 adults in the country, has a criminal record. And yet the majority of dental practices don't do criminal record checks before they hire people. Another thing that absolutely astounds me is that the norm in dentistry is that we don't drug test applicants. And one of the things I see firsthand in my day job is the amount of crime that's driven by drugs. So it's simple to do. There's now saliva-based drug testing, which is a whole lot easier to, I mean, that, you know, you, the dentist, can supervise your staff doing the drug test. You don't have to send them to a lab anymore. So that's made it easier. So the first cornerstone is hiring, because there are a whole lot of serial embezzlers out there. And by that, I mean people who steal in one practice and then get fired and get miraculously are working across the street. So pre-employment screening. The second thing is division of duties. And I don't have time to get into the nuts and bolts of how to do it here, but there's a really good article on my website that gives 3 basic rules for dividing up duties. The website is prosperident.com, and there's good information there. The purpose of dividing up duties properly is to make it so that if I work for you and I want to steal, I have to collude. In other words, I have to go to one of my coworkers and say, I really want to steal from Dr. Mendelson, but I need your help. And as soon as you make it so that stealing requires one person to approach another like that, the chance that it's going to happen at all goes down by about 80%. The third thing, and dentists hear this and it sounds like a lot of work, but it doesn't have to be. You need to do a couple of financial things, and I don't care how untalented at kind of the accounting of a practice you feel like you are. You have to do this. The first thing is, on a monthly basis, you have to compare collections according to your practice management software with what went into your bank. Because if you don't do that comparison, you have opened the door so that the dumbest, laziest thief on the planet can take your money. The second part of that is you need to take some steps to verify that the entries in your practice management software have integrity. Because if I can't steal from you by simply recording payments and not depositing the money, then I'm going to start tampering in your software to make it lie about how much money actually came in. And again, it's not something I can spend a lot of time on here without totally squeezing out my my co-presenters, so I won't. But integrity of entries and the articulation of collections to deposits are the final thing that you need to do.
Awesome. Really good advice to separate those duties. I've heard the extended lecture on that, and it's really good. I would encourage everybody to read that article, because it can really save you quite a headache, so to speak. Alan, what thoughts do you have from an HR perspective?
Yeah, I totally agree about background checks. Super important there. I think the big thing I would say about background checks is, if you haven't been doing those, and if you just heard David and go, okay, I'm going to do it, I'm going to finally start do that. Take action now, even if you're not hiring right now. For example, a company that we recommend is called DataQuest. What you need to do is go through a short setup process with them. They need to verify that you are a legitimate business, that you're allowed to do background checks. If you have certain positions that require the need of credit reports, there's a whole process to go to, you know, in a sense, vet that you're allowed to get that information. So start that process now, because when the time comes to actually run a background check in 2025, it's super fast and super easy. It's all web-based. The applicant gets all the documents, they e-sign them. The results can typically come back really quickly. So it's not like the old days where it took a week or 10 days to get results. The other thing is reference checking. And to be clear, when I say reference checking, I mean calling past employers, not calling their buddy that they put on the resume.
Not their college basketball coach.
And when you go to call them, don't call the phone number that they gave on the resume. Look up that business and call whatever business you find for that. Again, because people will say, oh yeah, you know, when you get this phone call, pretend to be Dr. So-and-so. Don't be surprised if you don't get all the information you want to get in reference checking. There are some forms that we have that you can have the applicant fill out and send to the past employer, and that sometimes, allows them to open up and provide more information. But try to get whatever you can from them. It's a really good step for the embezzlement protection, and also just to make sure that you don't get a bad hire or someone that has grossly exaggerated their experience or anything like that.
Great, great insight. Before I turn to you, Eric, I do want to remind everybody the Q&A is open. After your response, Eric, I want to pivot to one of the comments in the Q&A before we move forward. So any other thoughts from the experience that you've seen in your past client experiences and your expertise around the HR compliance element?
Just how important it is. And, the old adage is, hire slow, fire fast. And as we look across the spectrum, and as we were touching on previously, the, toxic cultures and otherwise, and having been involved with thousands of hires and dismissals, every single time, once you finally make that decision to terminate, like clockwork, when you walk out of the office that day, you think, my God, I should have done that 2 weeks, 2 months ago, or otherwise. So we're all guilty of it. We all hope for the best. We all, want to avoid the change or the difficult types of situations, but definitely hiring slow, getting a good sense for the person, the personality, and then if not a fit, or easily getting the initial feedback from some of the staff, etc., that this person is not aligned with our corporate goals or visions, right? Firing fast is a godsend.
Absolutely. I kind of want to pivot to one of the Q&As that came in because this speaks to some of our culture discussions. And if you gentlemen are okay, I'd like to also give my input on this one because this is my area. So we had a Q&A that said, quote, so as a GP, are we supposed to make the office a home away from home so that they can feel comfortable, like a country club? Sweet. How is this reasonable given the low rate of reimbursement? I've worked with teams all over North America. And so those examples that we were talking about are just examples. And so the truth of the matter is that we all spend more time with our teams than we do with anybody else. And there's so much research on this. I mean, if I won't go into it, but look up the Grant study or the Harvard study that went on for 75 years following all of these individuals from all sorts of walks of life and IQ and net worth and everything. And the single biggest predictor in life satisfaction was, quote, the warmth of human relationships. And so if you're spending more time with your team than anybody else and you feel like nobody on your team appreciates you, I think the first thing I would do is just look at what's going on in the practice. Think about the challenges that you've had. What kind of practice would you ideally like to have from a team cohesion perspective? And I've seen it time and time again, not only with colleagues, but also my clients. You can create that if you choose. And you know what? Not everybody's going to be the right person to have a seat on the bus, and that's got to be okay. But we can find the right people. There's lots of people in this world. So any other thoughts on this?
Well, Dr. Mendelson, maybe just expand on that because that's a great point. The millennial hires. How many doctors have I talked to that said,
Yeah.
I just don't get it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I grew up in this, and we're all from a similar
Mhm.
vintage. So we all grew up with a very
Yeah.
specific work ethic, et cetera, et cetera. And there is a ton of doctors I've talked to that just can't quite bridge the gap, if you
Yeah.
will.
I would say, I'm going to quote my dear friend, Dr. Kyle Stanley. It's all about communication, boundaries, and expectations. And so if we're not setting standard operating procedures, if we're not onboarding these people properly, expressing and communicating what the expectations are, then it's on us for being disappointed that those expectations aren't fulfilled. And there's ways that you can communicate the delegation process because that's really what you're doing at its core. You're having someone else, for example, process and sterilize instruments. There's ways that you can delegate anything in a different style through communication that establishes this two-way street so that when things go south, which they will, you can then go back to the discussion, the training, the SOP, the conversation, and say, so when we talked about this process and procedure, we all agreed we were going to do X, Y, or Z. Today, 3 times this didn't happen. What's changed for you? Is a very simplistic example. But without setting expectations, without setting standard operating procedures, without good onboarding, I mean, let's call it what it is. This is healthcare, right? So I think it makes some sense that we just don't throw somebody in. We need to train them adequately to our own office. So I really believe that most of our challenges in dentistry have to do with leadership, not necessarily the other party. Of course, there are other parties out there that aren't interested in fulfilling the tasks in the way that we expect them to. Absolutely 100%. But what was it, Alan? I think you said, hire slow and fire fast. It's like, that's where that comes in. So that's my thought on that.
Yeah, big time. And I mean, one of the things I hear in that question is, putting words in their mouth a little bit is feeling squeezed, right?
Yeah.
It's like, there's all this need and these things that I, as the dentist, have to seemingly create and build and all that. And yet maybe the money's not there, the reimbursement rates aren't there, whatever it is. And so I totally get that. When you're
Yeah.
squeezed, all these lofty, touchy-feely things can seem really impractical. And I get that. I would just say, whatever you can do to kind of unsqueeze yourself even just a little bit, and looking for those opportunities, that's a starting point. There are some aspects of appreciation that certainly don't cost any money. I mean, saying a genuine thank you to someone who handles a difficult patient, writing a handwritten note. There are a number of things that don't cost a whole lot of money. If folks aren't familiar with it, get the book, The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace.
Yep.
If you're familiar with the book, The 5 Love Languages, it's that same concept applied to the workplace. It's perfect for dentistry because it's very short, very intuitive, very easy to put in place, doesn't take a whole lot of money. And that culture of appreciation is something that you can slowly build, and the team will reciprocate and it'll come back to you. But it's one of those things where it's kind of chicken and egg. And ultimately, if you're the leader, it's got to start with you. You have to be the one to start this, and then it'll come back around.
Yeah, absolutely.
From my perspective, job satisfaction doesn't come from how much people are paid. It
Nope.
doesn't come from the opulence of their surroundings. In other words, you don't need to build a Taj Mahal to have satisfied employees. It comes from what I think of as the ground game. In other words, how you as the leader respond to situations. And I'll give you a very good example. An easy pathway to job dissatisfaction is when one of your team gets in a dispute with a patient and you don't back up that employee 100%. You take the side of the patient against the employee. Okay, just very simple. It costs you nothing to have your employees back, and it means everything to them. So when you look at yourself as a leader, and all of us here are leaders in our own businesses, and most of the audiences as well. Some of the basics of leadership are, as I say, standing up for your team. I come from a military background, and one of the things the military does inevitably when we're out in the woods somewhere is that the leaders eat last. And that tells the followers that they are more important than you in certain respects. And I think we have to adopt that. There is a book called Leaders Eat Last, which is a story of applying military leadership concepts to civilian activities. And I'll add that one to your reading list as well.
Yeah. Somebody asked to repeat the book. So is the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace, as well as the 5 love languages. Leaders eat last. And I will add one more, which is Crucial Conversations. That book can change your life because it's a methodology and a framework of how to take a fact of a situation, make it safe, not get as emotionally connected, and come out with a reasonable resolution coming out the other side. I literally talk about that book, I think, every day of my life. So, Eric, any other thoughts on your end?
No, bang on. Reading through that Q&A at the doctor and just saying, gosh, what more do I have to do for the staff? What
Yeah,
more can it's a country club or otherwise. We've all felt it, and it can certainly be frustrating. So at some point it's good to take a deep breath and saying, look, yes, the mindset of an incoming young new associate, very different from 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago,
yeah,
and then trying to spend the time to find out what matters. That, you know, driving hard, extra hours, working through the weekends for that extra dollar and that promotion. In our experience, seeing it with my own kids, very
yeah,
different type of mindset. And it's complete, I don't get it. But help spending the time to understand the needs of that team member and getting to know them. No, it's not about making a home away from home or otherwise. But if you did go out for a coffee or grab a lunch with them one day, or spend an extra half an hour or something with them at some point and just get a little bit to know them, and hey, what makes you tick? What gets you up in the morning, right? Finding out a little bit
absolutely.
about themselves or their future trip in the summertime with their fiance or whatever, and just see them light up. And now we know what motivates them. Now we know that it's that trip to Greece and they're saving up for it, and this is a great one, and they're going to go back to see where their grandmother grew up, etc. That now suddenly is a great way to parlay. Hey, I've got an extra shift available for you. I've got an extra up, right? And this would be a great opportunity to have some fun.
Absolutely. I love that. I need to make some t-shirts. One of the concepts from my book, life is not a game of dominoes, meaning just because one domino fell doesn't mean the rest of them are going to fall. Just because you have one bad hire doesn't mean everybody doesn't want to work. Just because you had one bad patient doesn't make for a bad day. And so life is not a game of dominoes. So as we come toward the top of the hour, I want to kind of come back to some financial elements here. And so we talked a lot about insurance reimbursements, costs, inflation. We talked about leasehold expenses, et cetera. In your opinions, from your areas of expertise, what are some specific financial strategies you think dentists or their team members can take back to their dentist that you would like to impart in the audience this evening?
Happy to kick things off. It's, certainly with the lease, everyone thinks, my God, my landlord is just, up and up and up and up and up. Really simply, there's seven main financial variables which completely go overlooked. And in most cases, the doctor's only looking at the first half of the first page, yet there's another 56 and a half other pages in there to the landlord's benefit to find more ways to extract money from the bank account. But base rent is an easy one. Annual increases is one that doesn't always factored in when taking that $35 per square foot actually represents $1.2 million exiting your bank account over the next 10 years. Triple nets and common area maintenance fees. That is incredibly negotiable, yet is hardly ever negotiated. A common area maintenance cap, so it can't go up more than a certain percent, or exclusions to certain pieces, and or amortizing over the useful life, or even just audit rights to make sure that the landlord isn't getting a little creative in the background and passing on spouses' salaries or 15% administration fees, which are completely unreasonable. But it is negotiable. In life, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate for. And then there's all sorts of things. Free rent. We did a 10-year term recently for a doctor. We got her 10 months worth of free rent that January of every year came in at $0. You're about to sign a $1 million check to the landlord in terms of a 10-year term or a 10-year renewal, etc. Swing for the fences, right? You can have so much to do. Fixturing period, if you're doing any renovations, avoiding those fees. Tenant improvement allowance can be great, but be cautious, right? Don't take money from the landlord when he didn't ask for it. They're just going to bake it into your rent, bake it into your annual increase. And that's why 54% of dentists are overpaying in rent. Yet they are the best tenants on the planet, right? The highest build out cost, lowest default rates at 0.5%. They're in the same location for 26 and a half years. Yet to take away today is start early, start 2 years prior to the lease expiry, get the data and facts, know what your rental rates are. Know what the comparable reports are close by, and even find out what the landlord down the street would be willing to do to entice you in. And then, in addition to that, really understand your value to the landlord. So many doctors just think, oh, I'm stuck. The landlord knows it. I can't go anywhere. They know I built out all the space. I have no leverage. I'll just, keep signing these exorbitant rates. Absolutely not. The landlord needs you more than you need them, believe it or not.
I love that. Absolutely. David, what are your thoughts?
Whew, a lot of them. I think one place where a lot of practices could probably do a better job is communicating with patients about wants as opposed to needs. In other words, I find it's easy to fall into the trap of people come in here and we fix what's broken and they go home. A question that can make a dentist a whole lot of money is to put a mirror in a patient's hand and say, tell me what it is about your smile you'd like to change if you could. And whatever the patient says after that is going to help the doctor financially. So I think sometimes we get very focused on our problems and you know, to pick up what's become a theme tonight of dealing with problem staff or staff that come from a different generation than you do and you don't really know how to talk to each other. And we forget that, you know, at the end of this process, you have patients who are more than a life support system for 32 teeth. And I think a lot of dentists could do a better job of engaging with those patients and finding out what they'd like to have as opposed to what they need, and then finding a way to give it to them.
That's fantastic. I think, Alan, before you start in, Eric, what do you think? Let's throw up the last set of polls, because there were some questions in the Q&A. In fact, one very specific one just came in, and so part of the exit poll is, you know, rating of the course, which we need for CE purposes as well. But it's also your way to choose to engage with any one of us if you need further help in these various areas as we go forward. So, Alan, what are your thoughts as we start to conclude the hour?
Yeah, the only thing I have to add, and this is a little bit weird, is I am going to bring up two things that are basically invisible. You know, what you guys have talked about are perfect examples where you can clearly see those numbers detailed, exactly what they are, and so on. One thing I would bring up is, in a sense, the the financial risks of not getting specifically HR compliance correctly. And that could be fines and penalties, lawsuits, out of court settlements, and so on. You don't have a line item in your budget for that. Nobody does. And you certainly don't want a line item for any of that stuff. The other thing that is also invisible is the cost of turnover. Lots of different estimates for how much turnover costs you. It's a lot more than just, you know, how much you pay to Indeed. It's lost production, it's people's time, it's storming, forming, norming, all of that. And a lot of the estimates put the cost of turnover at that person's salary for a year. So if this is a $40,000 a year position and it turns over, you're losing $40,000 in lost production, collections, and so on. And so it's hard, right? Because that's an invisible number. Most people are real focused on what were my actual physical costs, you know, that I had in my P&L. But just another thing to think about in this whole concept about longevity and having the right people in the right seats on the bus and how all of that impacts your overall financial picture.
I love it, love it, love it. In the last minute, Art had put up, "How do I get in touch with Eric?" Answer the poll questions, and he will be able to get in touch with you. As we finish our time together, I'm gonna put you all on the spot. If you were a dental owner right now, I'm gonna make you a magical dental owner. What's the one thing you would do tomorrow based on your area of expertise? Just one thing.
That's easy for me. I would just say go to your team and express how incredibly grateful you are that they are there and they're working for you. Because again, unless you've got a team of people that are just complete knuckleheads, all of them could go and work for any practice anywhere in the entire country, and they could probably get a job somewhere making more money than you're paying them. And so just keep that in mind that these people have chosen to work for your practice and help you with your goals and your career aspirations and so on. And just express that gratitude. You can never express it too much.
Love it. We got about a minute left. Eric, what's your one thought?
Beyond reading the lease, and you would be shocked, Martin, how few doctors have actually read their lease.
Actually
Um,
not.
But no, the two things I would do is two. When I do get to the office tomorrow morning, I would dig up that lease, the last renewal, and I would add two things into my calendar. I would add the exact date of my option to renew deadline and the exact date of my lease expiry. And I would set the reminder to go off 2 years prior to both of those dates so that we're starting things as early as possible. And then there's no excuse when, oh, shoot, when was that date again? When was I supposed to notify the landlord? Because you lose not only your two options to renew, the landlord can put whatever they want, brand new lease right in front of you. And with 2 months to go, very difficult situation.
David, what are your thoughts?
Two things. The first thing is I will quote the 40th president of the United States, who said three very good words: trust but verify.
Mm, yeah,
And a lot of dentists trust without verification, and sooner or later that's going to end badly for you.
absolutely.
Along the same lines, I encourage dentists to think about the difference between delegation and abdication. And delegation means I'm giving you a responsibility. I'm going to monitor how you're doing on that responsibility, and I'm going to invest the mental energy I have to understand that thing I'm giving you enough that I can tell if you're actually doing it properly. Abdication is, I don't ever want to hear about this again. And a lot of dentists abdicate when what really needs to happen is delegation. So I encourage you to think about the difference between those two things and which one you're doing in certain cases and whether it's appropriate.
I think for me, I would say mind your thoughts. Because your thoughts will for always and forevermore come before anything that comes out between your lips or happens between your fingers. And a lot of what we tell ourselves every day is really quite scary if anybody else would hear it. And so our thoughts drive our emotions that create actions that manifest the result of our lives. So, gentlemen, I want to thank each and every one of you. There was a lot of engagement in the Q&A. I want to encourage everybody, if you're looking for some help, answer the question in the exit poll, and the respective party will get back in touch with you. We're here to help in our respective areas, and we really want to thank you and respect that you've taken the really valuable time out of your lives to spend some time with us. So thank you very much, and we wish you all the health and best wishes. Take care, everybody.
Perfect. Thank you, Martin.
Yes.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, David. Thanks, Al.
Bye, everybody.